Coming up in today's newscast, pro-Israel activist and longtime ILTV correspondent Ari Fuld is tragically murdered by a Palestinian terrorist. Airstrikes targeted an Iranian plane in Damascus, funneling weapons into Syria. And if you're looking for something to binge this weekend, Israeli storytellers and Netflix have got you covered. We begin with some truly tragic news today, and this time it's actually something quite personal to us. Pro-Israel activist Ari Fuld, whom many of you may know as a longtime freelance correspondent and co-host here at ILTV, has just been murdered by a Palestinian terrorist. He was stabbed to death mere hours ago outside a shopping mall in Gush Etzion. And as you can imagine, this is quite difficult news to give. Ari's death shouldn't be underscored by the life that he lived, both as a man and as an advocate for Israel, the country that he so passionately loved and fought for. It was this passion that brought him to work for Standing Together, an NGO that has supported IDF soldiers since its founding in 2003. This work brought Fuld to audiences all over the world and eventually to us here at ILTV, where he contributed for many years as a correspondent in the field, as an expert guest, and as a co-host of the show Frenemies. For those of you who know him or his work, it may not surprise you to learn that news of his death has touched and shaken many near and far, including those within the highest levels of the Israeli government. Education Minister Naftali Bennett has called him a hero, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has personally posted his own condolences on Facebook, calling Ari a heroic fighter for Israel. As a true testament to the kind of man that Ari was, even his final act was one of perseverance and total bravery. After being fatally stabbed by his attacker, he managed to pull out his handgun and shoot his assailant before collapsing on the ground in order to save those around him from a similar fate. Ari's funeral will be held tonight at Gush Etzion Cemetery. All of us here at the station will certainly cherish Ari Fuld's memory, and we are sending our deepest condolences to his family, his wife, and his 4 children. This is a difficult goodbye to a very cherished friend. Because of just how personal this news is, we'd like to now take you live to the mall in Gush Etzion, where longtime ILTV contributor Ari Fuld was fatally stabbed just moments ago. At the scene now, joining us via Skype, is Josh Haston, who, in addition to being a talk radio host for the Land of Israel Network, also co-hosts ILTV's Frenemies, the very show, of course, which Ari Fuld once regularly hosted. Josh, can you hear me over there?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, now you've been over there for a little while already, so what have you seen? What's the scene over there?
When I arrived here a couple hours ago, the security personnel and the crew here were literally cleaning the blood off the sidewalk here from what was a truly tragic day. Ari Fuld, as you mentioned, a true lover of the land of Israel, the people of Israel, who contributed in so many different ways, touched so many lives here, was brutally murdered, stabbed in the back, yet he died a hero, turning on the terrorist, able to fire towards him and probably save other lives here. That's the way he lived. He lived for the people of Israel, doing whatever he could for the soldiers and civilians of the state of Israel 24 hours a day. You can often find Ari making videos at 2 o'clock in the morning, just trying to showcase the beauty of Israel, trying to give a picture of the reality of what's going on here in Israel. And ironically, I'm speaking to you at ILTV about 12 hours before his death. Ari sent me a message just in the middle of the night last night saying that I did a great job, in his opinion, on my last appearance on Israeli Frenemies, which just aired 2 days ago on Friday. That's the last I heard from Ari, really just a few hours before this horrible, horrible tragedy, this brutal murder, stabbed in the back by a jihadist, by a terrorist.
Yeah. I understand that they're now, I mean, life is somewhat resumed there at the site, but I understand that there's people there with candles holding prayers for Ari. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a whole group of people here outside. I'm inside one of the local stores here. A group of children, one of the local schools has showed up. The mayor of Gush Etzion, Mayor Shlomo Naaman, has set up a tent here at the site, moving his office and all of the employees from his office, from the municipality, here on the spot to show solidarity with the family, to say goodbye to Ari. Candles are being lit. There's speakers right now talking about Ari and about the situation and how, despite it all, we have to persevere. I mean, as you guys know from all your years of having Ari on the program, he was passionate, about his Zionism, passionate about the land of Israel, about Judea and Samaria, whether you agreed with him or didn't agree with everything he said, it didn't really matter. I mean, he lived for the land of Israel, for its people, sharing its beauty and the reality to the world. That's what he dedicated his life to, and it's a truly a tragedy that he's gone. It's thanks to Ari that I appeared on ILTV. I think that's how you guys found me, is through Ari's videos. I was on one of his videos. So it's sad, it's sick, but unfortunately this is our reality. But we are going to pick up and keep going, and we're going to be strong. And we know it's a long journey. But we lost a true hero today in Ari Fuld.
Yeah, well, it's shocking. Well, what can I say? We're all quite shocked here. I think a lot of us are still quite shell-shocked. You know, I think when a lot of us heard this news, Ari is the last one that any one of us ever expected would be killed in an attack like this. I mean, Ari taught self-defense classes to women, as well as karate classes for self-defense against attacks just like this, which of course makes this news all the more surreal and painful, difficult.
And ironically, usually when these attacks happen, Ari's the first one to report on them.
Yeah.
He gets there before any of the mainstream media. I mean, he's always on the scene. And I actually, ironically, sadly, I said to myself this morning when I heard about an attack at Gush Etzion, when I went on Facebook, I was like, where's Ari Fuld? Why isn't Ari reporting? That's the first thought that went through my mind, just to give you a picture of all of the volunteer work that he did, just to give a picture of the reality here in Israel, for better or for worse, the good, the bad, and everything in between. He was the first one on the scene, and I was surprised, and not in my wildest imagination did I think that he was the victim of today's attack. But again, he died a hero, and people need to know that. People need to remember that. But there's a huge void in the world of Israeli public diplomacy. It didn't matter that he wasn't an official for the government in the state of Israel. He did everything in his power to get the word, to spread the word about Israel to the world. And that's what he'll be remembered for. Also, of course, a loving husband, father to 4 children who unfortunately were orphaned. This is a result of the hatred which we live with day in and day out. Unfortunately, that's part of it too here in Israel.
Right. Well, Josh, I want to thank you so much for being there, and I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank
and I
you.
want to remind all of our viewers that Ari's funeral is tonight, if you're watching this newscast, tonight at 11 p.m. Israel time in Gush Etzion Cemetery.
They moved it to 11:30. I was just told 11:30 tonight. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Josh.
Thanks so much.
Well, explosions rocked the Damascus airport in Syria late last night. Pro-regime sources say that Syrian air defense batteries shot down a large flurry of attempted airstrikes, which most accuse Israel of leading this affront. And this alleged attack is said to have targeted an Iranian shipment of weapons and storage facilities. If true, this indeed would be a prime target for Israeli forces. At this time, it remains unclear just how much damage was done in the attack. As per military policy, the IDF has neither confirmed nor denied any involvement here. Now, having said that, military spokesman only weeks ago confirmed that Israel had conducted some 200 airstrikes throughout Syria in recent years. And this latest incident would certainly follow similar strategies allegedly used by the Israeli Air Force in the past. Reports suggest that this round of attacks focused primarily on 2 targets: an Iranian plane carrying weapons that had just landed in Damascus from Tehran, and a series of storage rooms at Damascus airport believed to be storing weapons. But most troubling of all is one report that suggests that these rooms were labeled with United Nations or DHL mail service logos. If correct, this would suggest a clear and concerted effort to thwart Israeli efforts and sneak under the radar. With the Syrian civil war largely coming to a close following 7 bloody years, Israeli leaders have promised to do everything in their power to keep Iran from claiming a foothold in the destabilized region. Presuming this latest airstrike was indeed the work of the Israeli military, it would demonstrate the army's willingness to make good on that threat. The Trump administration has just cut the last of its financial aid to the Palestinian civilians. This final $10 million aid package formally funded joint Israeli-Palestinian peace programs for coexistence, programs that included soccer games, mutual farming, and other such cooperatives. White House officials say that while the decision is regrettable, these programs themselves are useless if current Palestinian leaders fail to engage with the U.S. on Trump's still unseen peace plan. Jared Kushner especially has defended the administration's cuts to the Palestinians, saying that these punitive measures are the only way to make the Palestinians listen. For others, however, this sudden and abrupt end to U.S. funding of programs that mostly benefits Palestinian and Israeli children is a sign that the White House may have reached the end of its diplomatic abilities. Indeed, U.S. aid, which receives foreign aid funds from the government but is able to act independently of it, says that they will continue funding such joint operative programs themselves. For them, these programs represent the best hope of instilling instilling the seeds of peace at a young age, seeds which could impact future leadership. Israeli leaders have largely hailed these latest U.S. budget cuts to the Palestinians, especially its defunding of UNRWA, the UN's chief refugee agency for the Palestinians. At the same time, however, many of those supporters do worry that if cornered under pressure, Palestinians may succumb to desperate or even violent measures. With pressure mounting against Palestinian leadership, many are beginning to wonder just how long the Palestinian Authority can continue to hold out. Returning now to the studio to discuss Israel's option for if and when the PA should collapse is the founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, Dr. Martin Sherman. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Sherman.
Thank you. Just allow me 1 second to express my condolences to the Fuld family on the tragic loss of Ari in this brutal terrorist attack. Very, very sad.
Yes, thank you. We're very much still in shock about that. Well, that brings us to this situation at hand. First of all, I have to ask, do you think that the Palestinian Authority is in imminent collapse? Are we seeing the beginning of a collapse there?
Well, it's certainly plausible, and one might hope so. I think that the Palestinian Authority expresses one of the major faults in the whole ill-advised, to put it mildly, the Oslo process. And I think that as the Oslo process descends into ignominious failure, I think the Palestinian Authority should sink with it.
Mm. So that brings us to the question, of course, you saw that the Trump administration has cut the last of its funds to Palestinian programs. Of course, they defunded all their funds to UNRWA in recent weeks. Do you think, now a lot of the money for UNRWA goes to refugee agencies all over the globe, but do you think that the cut of that money is going to impact the political infrastructure in the West Bank?
Well, it certainly may have a very positive impact in the fact that it might take the right of return, which envisages millions of Palestinians returning to the so-called former homes in Israel. And I think there will now be increasing pressure for more logical solution for them to be settled in their countries of residence in the Arab world, where they've been living for decades. And this should be the logical outcome of the cutting of the funds of the UNRWA, because UNRWA basically was never really a humanitarian organization. It was a political organization using humanitarian issues to advance its political goal, i.e. the right of return, which basically would spell the end of Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people.
Right. So that brings me to the future. If and when the Palestinian Authority should collapse, of course, there's many different end scenarios. There could be one successor that kind of keeps a centrified government. There could be tribal warfare, in a sense, criminal warfare, gang warfare. My question is, what would be in Israel's best interest to deal with in the event of collapse?
Well, I think we've discussed this before in the past, and I think that the only solution that is commensurate with Israel's long-term survival as the nation-state of the Jewish people is the eventual immigration of the Arab population in Judea and Samaria, or a large part of it, under a system whereby there are positive incentives for leaving and negative disincentives for staying. I believe the only way that Israel can continue to endure as a nation-state of the Jewish people is by dramatically eroding the presence of the Arab west of the Jordan River. And I think the resettling of the Arab refugees in the Arab world could be an important precedent for this kind of development.
Mm-hmm. Well, many believe that that's exactly what's shortly to happen, especially if pressure from the U.S. and other allies keeps pressuring the Palestinians like this. Dr. Sherman, I'm sure we'll be talking about this again. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Clashes along the Gaza border turned violent over the weekend. The IDF reported tens of thousands of Palestinians attempted to infiltrate the border, as well as throwing deadly firebombs and stones. Israeli forces have responded with force to these threats, and at this time, 3 Palestinians, including a 12-year-old boy, have been killed in these latest clashes. This is, of course, only the latest flash of violence along the Gaza border. These gatherings officially began as the Hamas-sponsored March of Return protests, which rallied earlier this year leading up to the opening of the new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Months later, however, Palestinians have continued to gather and picket along the border in what is becoming a weekly flashpoint of violence between Gazans and IDF troops attempting to contain them. At this time, nearly 177 Palestinians, including several children, medical workers, and journalists, have all been killed in these clashes. At the same time, however, Hamas has acknowledged that the vast majority of those slain have all been members of their own ranks. Israeli leaders have defended Israel's right to defend itself, even with lethal means, in the face of such obvious violence. But the death death toll has sparked international condemnation and calls for investigations into IDF conduct. This weekend's death of a 12-year-old Palestinian child amidst these clashes sums up the paradox well, with conflicting reports that suggest no clear end in sight. Hamas officials, for example, and witnesses say that the boy died when an Israeli tear gas canister struck his head. But IDF forces say that their video evidence proves the child was struck by a Palestinian stone from their side of the fence. And health ministry reports from Gaza only specify that the child died due to an unspecified head wound, with no other clarification offered. Rumors of an attempted Israeli-Hamas ceasefire have all but run out of steam at this point. The only sure thing now is that these clashes will continue to erupt as they have so far for months on end. Well, on a terror-related note, Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman has today announced his intentions to block any and all efforts to release Palestinians convicted of terrorism through early parole. ILTV's Aaron Porras joins us with more details. And Aaron, where's this coming from exactly?
Well, the announcement comes just a few days after the IDF ordered a change in policy, actually, in response to a petition that made its way to the High Court. See, right now, Palestinians convicted of terror-related charges are sentenced through military courts in Israel. And unlike civilian inmates, military prisoners don't have access to parole hearings. So basically what happens here is that a Palestinian inmate convicted of a murder in 1988 is now claiming that he's being discriminated against because he has no parole board to turn to. So in response, the IDF reported to Yediot Ahronot that a parole advisory committee headed by a military judge would be created. But unfortunately for any Palestinians hoping to take advantage of this committee, Defense Minister Lieberman has stated, as you said, that, quote, "As long as I'm defense minister, no terrorist will get a shortened sentence, not even by an hour."
Interesting. Quote. So it's also a matter of jurisdictions over the courts. Okay. Now, just to clarify this, no Palestinians convicted of terrorism or sentenced to life can file for parole at all, right?
No, actually they can, but all parole decisions for terror suspects goes through the IDF Central Command Chief, and he doesn't typically use that power, actually, ever. Pretty much the only terror suspects to be released early by Israel were released under the terms of a prisoner exchange. But that doesn't leave much room at all for any potential rehabilitation programs. And that's really kind of at the core of the argument here, too. In civilian prisons, you can participate in a rehabilitation program, among other things, and that kind of sits as a prerequisite to filing for the parole. Exactly. The inmate in question has undergone rehabilitation programming and has spent nearly 30 years of his life sentence in prison, yet he isn't considered in the slightest by the courts.
Interesting. Now, he'd be released for good behavior, potentially, or is that an option?
I mean, again, ultimately the final decision, even with the creation of these advisory committees, would fall under the IDF Central Command Chief. So it's unlikely that paroles would actually be handed out in any easier fashion than they have been. But we may indeed start seeing parole cases actually being heard in scenarios that we've never seen them before.
Yeah, I mean, that would certainly be a huge change, so I'm sure if that happens, we'll have a lot to talk about again. In the meantime, thanks for the report, Aaron.
Thank you.
David Keyes, the man who serves as Prime Minister Netanyahu's spokesman to foreign media, has just taken a leave of absence following 14 bombshell accusations of sexual misconduct. At this time, 4 women have come forward alleging acts of criminal sexual assault. Keyes has fiercely denied these allegations and says that he will use his time off from office to, quote, clear his name. This scandal first erupted when New York State Senate candidate Julia Salazar confirmed that she had first accused Keyes of assaulting her several years ago in a private Facebook post. Keyes denounced the charges, pointing out that Salazar had been caught lying about her own credentials in the past. But mere hours later, Wall Street Journal reporter Shandy Rice seemed to corroborate Salazar's story, recounting her own run-in with Keyes in which she felt physically and aggressively attacked. Within the next 48 hours, no less than 14 women, some anonymous, came forward with what they claim is a history of sexual misconduct made by Keyes over the last several years. Most shocking of all, however, is the testimony of a young woman from North America who claims that Keyes sexually assaulted her mere weeks after taking office as the Prime Minister's spokesman for foreign media in 2016. This incident and others spurred the editor of the Wall Street Journal at that time, Bret Stephens, to personally warn the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Ron Dermer, that Keyes had committed sexual misconduct. Dermer had actually confirmed that he did receive this warning from Stephens, but now claims that he did not inform Prime Minister Netanyahu of it because he did not feel that the charges were criminal in nature. Knesset members, however, are beginning to rally for an investigation into this story because in Israel, sexual misconduct is, in fact, a criminal offense, especially if committed by a government official while in office. Many Israeli lawmakers are deeply troubled if a U.S. ambassador did, in fact, hide this kind of information from the prime minister. At this time, no criminal charges have been filed against Keyes, and many of these incidents seem to have taken place while he lived in the United States. But given the serious nature of the accusations, clearly this is a very sensitive issue that will perhaps lead to more. Israeli athlete Lini Ashram has done it again. The 19-year-old gymnast has just claimed yet another silver medal at the finals of the Rhythmic Gymnastics Championship in Bulgaria, a win that puts her well on the path for Olympic glory at the 2020 Games in Tokyo. Ashram has quickly become one of Israel's top athletes in a relatively short amount of time. She's been racking up bronze, silver, and gold medals left and right at international competitions for the last several weeks. But these events are more than just opportunities for glory. They're actually qualifying rounds for the 2020 Games in Tokyo, making the stakes extra high. Well, Ashram has been clearing that bar at record speed. Last month, in fact, she actually set a world record at the World Challenge Cup in Minsk with her score in the clubs event. At those same games, she became the first ever athlete to win dual gold medals in the same competition. Though the clubs are probably her specialty, Ashram has won medals in all 5 categories of gymnastics, including this latest silver in the individual all-around finals, which combines a whole routine of the hoop, the clubs, the ball, and of course the ribbon. Israel's never won an Olympic medal for gymnastics, but at the rate she's going, Ashram may very well be ready to change that once and for all. Prime Minister Netanyahu probably said it best, saying, quote, "You have caused all of us to be proud. You do this with amazing flexibility and great personal ability." I've got a question. Are you looking for something new to binge this weekend? Well, as usual, Netflix has got you covered. The streaming giant has just released its newest film, The Angel, which tells the true story of an Egyptian spy who warned Israel about the incoming Yom Kippur War of 1973, and that's a very fitting film to watch ahead of the actual Yom Kippur holiday, which takes place later this week. This incredible story is almost too unbelievable to be true. Adapted by the Oscar-nominated screenwriter of Children of Men from the book The Angel, the Egyptian spy who saved Israel, the new film is an amazing recreation of Israel and Egypt in 1972. Tunisian actor Marwan Kenzari plays real-life Egyptian Asaf Marwan. Marwan was born into the top echelon of Egyptian elite in 1944. As a young man, he was both the son-in-law of Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser and then later a top advisor to Nasser's successor, President Sadat. It was from this vantage point that Marwan saw firsthand of the Egyptian effort to organize and launch a surprise war against Israel in the 1970s, which was, of course, the infamous Yom Kippur War of 1973. Whether motivated by money or by a genuine hope to end the bloodshed to come, Marwan began funneling intel to Israel in the lead-up to the war. On October 5, 1973, he phoned his Mossad handler with the message, quote, "War will start tomorrow." The Israeli military launched an emergency preparation for battle, and true to Marwan's warning, Egyptian and Syrian forces launched their surprise attack less than 24 hours later on October 6th. Millions of Israeli lives were saved thanks to Marwan's intel, an effort which has made him quite possibly the most important and best foreign spy in Israeli history. Needless to say, this is definitely Netflix-worthy material. The film features all kinds of Israeli talent both in front of and behind the camera, so needless to say, this is certainly a film you'll want to bump to the top of your queue. And now for our Hebrew word of the day. Netflix just released a new film called The Angel about an Egyptian spy who saved millions of Israeli lives. And that's why today's word is malach, which means an angel. So does it ever feel like you have a certain secret somebody always watching over you, protecting you? If so, that maybe means that you have a personal malach, or a kind of personal guardian angel. But sometimes you'll also hear someone call someone else a malach just for doing something good. In Israel, you'll even hear malach used as a word for your partner, kind of like sweetie or my love. Okay, that's maybe a little over the top, but sure, hey, go ahead, because if you've got yourself a malach, I say hold on tight. On that, let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be partly cloudy but warm with a low of 75 or 24 degrees Celsius, and tomorrow you can expect little to no changes with a high of about 86 or 30 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.58 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at ILTV.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Brett Allen Smith. Thank you for watching.
Let's go. תודה רבה לך, thank you very much.
No problem.